Our special guest from Poland, Mr. Tomasz Sakiewicz, Editor-in-Chief of the Polish Gazette and TV Republika in Poland.
Today, we cannot wait any longer. We have to stop Russian imperialism before the war spreads.
In August 2008, Russia invaded Georgia.
Besides, pilot error could not possibly have broken a plane up into 60,000 aircraft fragments.
Polish President Lech Kaczyński was seen as a deadly threat by Moscow.
Besides these countries, Moscow has a hand in several other conflicts.
Diplomatic appeasement and negotiating will not persuade Putin to behave in a normal, rational manner.
I would also like to ask you not to forget about Belarus.
Flying to Smolensk, Russia on April 10, 2010, President Kaczyński was drawn into a deadly trap.
Who's next? Stop Putin now.
If Ukraine becomes Novorossiya and the West collapses, it will not be because of Russia's physical strength, but because of our mental weakness.
Good afternoon. My name is Yaroslav Baran, President of the Ukrainian-Canadian Congress in Ottawa, and I would like to welcome and thank all of our partners in organizing today's rally. The Polish Gazette Club of Ottawa, EuroMaidan Ottawa, the Ukrainian National Federation Ottawa-Gatineau, the Baltic Federation of Canada, and the Central and Eastern European Council of Canada. We are here today to remind Canadians that Ukraine is not the first victim of Russian aggression. Today, we commemorate 4 acts of aggression. The invasion of Georgia in 2008. Mr. Czesław Piazza.
In August 2008, Russia invaded Georgia. The invasion was accomplished by fomenting civil unrest among the citizens of Georgia, then blaming the Georgian government for the humanitarian catastrophe, supplying local insurgents with military equipment, moving Russian tanks and troops masquerading as local insurgents into Georgia, waging an information war to confuse the true nature and scope of Russia's aggression on the state, and bullying NATO and the US against taking collective action to stop Putin. On August 8, 2008, when the world's attention was focused on the opening ceremony of the Summer Olympics in Beijing, Putin officially deployed the Russian army and launched airstrikes. Putin decided that the Georgian government had lost the right to rule. Putin asserted that he was protecting Russian citizens and peacekeepers in Georgia. Putin justified his invasion on the grounds that it was the responsibility of the Russian government to defend vulnerable population in Georgia. Putin orchestrated an active information war characterized by secrets, half-truths, evasions, lies, shams, and disguises. When the Russian troops and tanks invaded Georgia, the late Polish President Lech Kaczyński called on the international community to rally in his support. The presidents of Poland, Lithuania, Estonia, Ukraine, and the Prime Minister of Latvia appeared in front of the Georgian Parliament in Tbilisi on August 12, 2008. Their action stopped further advancement of Russian invasion. The late Polish President Lech Kaczyński said during the rally in Tbilisi, "We know that today Georgia, tomorrow Ukraine, the Baltic states the day after tomorrow, and they may be my country." At that time, those words were not taken seriously. But recent events in Ukraine show that Russian military actions may threaten independent, widely recognized states, even just behind the eastern border of NATO and the European Union. The West strongly condemned Putin and threatened sanctions. But in the end, they were never put in place, and Russian troops remain in Georgia to this day. In the aftermath, Russia's international relations remained largely intact. Putin learned that he could wage a war with impunity. International silence about terrorism has global consequences. As you can see, Ukraine is not the first. Who will be the next? Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Moldova, and Kazakhstan have large Russian-speaking populations. Will Putin create humanitarian pretext to justify his invasion of these sovereign nations? Russian troops have been permanently stationed in the Arctic since 2013. Are Canada and the US at risk of Putin's expansionist agenda? Who will be next? This is why we need to act faster, with stronger force against Russian aggression.
The crash of Smolensk Polish Air Force One, 2010. Mr. Václav Kujbida.
4 years ago, on April 10, 2010, a Polish plane crashed in the city of Smolensk, Russia, killing all the crew and passengers abroad. The 96 deaths included the Polish president, First Lady, 9 top NATO generals, several members of Polish parliament, senators, and other prominent and respected figures of the Polish elite. They were traveling to Russia to attend the 70th anniversary of the Katyn massacre. They were traveling to honor 22,000 Polish POWs, soldiers, between them officers, lawyers, priests, and professors, slaughtered in the forest near Smolensk by the Soviets 70 years ago. Within the hours of the crash, the Russian government already issued statement blaming the pilots. My friends, conclusive determination about the cause of crash cannot legitimately be made within a few short hours. Besides, pilot error could not possibly have broken a plane up into 60,000 aircraft fragments. Instead of establishing an independent international investigation commission, a supposedly comprehensive investigation into the crash was later conducted by a Russian investigation team. Please remember, this suspicious crash of the Polish Air Force One happened over the Russian military airport. The Russian investigation not only was compromised by secrets, half-truths, evasions, lies, shams, and disguises, but also hidden and falsified inconvenient findings from the field. A fair investigation was blocked by Russia's refusal to cooperate, including refuse to return to Poland black boxes and original tapes from them, returning remaining of the wreckage heavily dismembered and cut into the pieces after the crash. However, an independent Polish Parliamentary Commission for the investigation on the Smolensk crash was established to review Russia's report against the crash evidence they had access to. The team was made up of many scientists and aviation experts from various backgrounds and countries. They determined that the report issued by the Russian investigation team was full of factual inconsistencies, contradictions, and adulterations. They believed that an explosion caused the Polish Air Force One to crash, and it wasn't pilot error. They believed that an explosion blew up the plane into the 60,000 pieces. They believed the plane crash on Russian soil was the subject of a terrorist attack, a political assassination. But the international community was silent about that. International silence about terrorism has a global consequences. This is why we need to act faster with stronger force against any act of aggression. To this day, Russian authorities still refuse to turn over to Poland the wreckage of the plane, black boxes, full photos of the crash site, cell phones, electronics, and personal items of the passengers. Or they refuse to give full and unrestricted access to the location of the crash. due to Russian ban to open welded coffins, to this day some families do not know who rests in their graves. A few families who legally force authorities to do an exhumation have found that bodies were interchanged with other victims. Also, some bodies were desecrated. We are confident that our joint efforts help establish an independent international investigation commission and can bring to justice the guilty, and that the truth about the death of our loved ones will be known throughout the world. Together, our voices are stronger. Who is the next?
The annexation and ongoing occupation of Crimea and the current war against Ukraine. Mr. Anton Sestritsin, himself a Crimean in exile.
The EuroMaidan protests started in November 2013 after the Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych refused to sign an association agreement that had been in the works with the European Union for several years. Instead, he established closer ties with the Russian Federation. Ukrainians took to the streets in a peaceful demonstration of their disappointment because it did not reflect the will of the people. On January 16, 2014, anti-protest laws were passed that suddenly rendered all Ukrainians demonstrating their disagreement on Maidan as criminals. At that point, the protest morphed into a demand for basic human rights, freedom, justice, and dignity. This demand turned violent on February 22nd, when the Russian-backed government gave the order for the use of live ammunition to disperse the gathering of Ukrainians in Maidan, which left more than 100 people dead, 15,000 injured, and more than 100 missing. The Yanukovych regime finally collapsed. As a result of the demands from the Maidan, he was impeached. Yanukovych fled Ukraine to take refuge in Russia. Ukrainians were pleased that they ousted a criminal president and hoped to elect a new one in May. They hoped for a fresh start. They looked forward to a new democratic and free future for themselves and their children. When the world's attention was focused on the 2014 Winter Olympics in Sochi, Putin invaded Crimea. On February 27, 2014, Crimean-based Russian troops seized government buildings in the capital city of Simferopol. Russian flags were raised over government buildings, and the self-proclaimed Prime Minister of Crimea announced that he would hold a referendum for separation from Ukraine. An illegal referendum was held on the 16th of March in the absence of international observers or independent media. Only 30% of Crimeans took part in the referendum, and only 15 of those who voted in favor of uniting with Russia. However, election reports provided to the media suggested that over 90% of Crimeans voted in favor of separating from Ukraine and joining the Russian Federation. Russification of Crimea began immediately. Many Crimean Tatars, Ukrainians, and those who opposed the illegal annexation were forced to flee. Putin then turned his attention to East Ukraine, where he fomented civil unrest among the citizens, supplied local insurgents with military equipment, moved Russian tanks and troops masquerading as local insurgents into Ukraine. He waged an information war to confuse the true nature and scope of his aggression on the state and bullied NATO and the United States against taking collective action to stop him. Putin has orchestrated an active information war that is characterized by secrets, half-truth, evasions, lies, shames, and disguises. This treasury of Ukraine was looted by the Yanukovych regime, and Ukraine's ability to defend itself against Putin's invasion was seriously impaired. So far, the war waged on Ukraine has claimed 2,600 lives, displaced 260,000 people, and severely injured the economic, social, and financial infrastructure of a country that merely aspired democratic reform, self-determination, and distance from the iron fist of the Russian Federation. International silence about terrorism has global consequences. As you can see, Ukraine is not the first. In 1995, Putin abrogated an agreement with Chechnya on autonomy and invaded the state. There were no effective countermeasures by the West. Putin learned that he could wage a war with impunity. In 2008, Georgia was invaded and annexed. There were no effective countermeasures by the West. Putin learned that he could wage a war with impunity. Besides these countries, Moscow has a hand in several other conflicts. Putin openly supports Syrian mercenaries in Iraq, and he supplies modern weapons to Hamas terrorists. Ukraine is not the first time since the Cold War that Putin has tried to redraw European borders. International silence about terrorism has global consequences. This is why we need to act faster with stronger force against Russian aggression. Thank you.
The downing of Flight MH17, 2014. Mizvira Yuzik.
On July 17, 2014, Malaysian Airlines Flight MH17, an international passenger flight, was blown out of the sky. It was traveling from the Netherlands to Lumpur, where it was deliberately shot down over an eastern Ukrainian territory controlled by Russian-backed terrorists. 298 innocent people on board the plane were murdered that day. The person most responsible is Vladimir Putin. The downing of the MH17 and the desecration of the bodies in the sunflower fields of eastern Ukraine is a tragedy beyond reason and comprehension. Pieces of the plane, human remains, passports, and money were spread in a radius of 10 miles. The bodies of those on board were left to decay and decompose in the hot summer sun for many days. Approximately 100 are still unaccounted for. What was Putin's reaction to this crash? The tragedy immediately drew forth a torrent of contradictory and implausible theories from the Kremlin to try to obfuscate and confuse. Putin immediately turned up the volume of his propaganda machine. He waged an information war characterized by secrets, evasions, lies, shams, and disguises. Sometimes he blamed the Ukrainian government, other times he blamed the United States. The lies got more complex and convoluted as time passed on. He also tried to hide and falsify inconvenient findings from the field. Armed Russian-backed terrorists denied access to the crash site, hindered search efforts, planned to covertly send the black boxes to Moscow, and deliberately tampered with and contaminated the crash site. The families of those who died deserve justice and closure. An international investigation into the incident is being held, led by the Dutch Safety Board. Their preliminary report is expected in mid-September, and their final report is due next year. Despite a ceasefire between the Ukrainian government forces and Russian-backed terrorists, heavy fighting continues. It has been almost 2 months since MH17 crashed, and the area still has not been secured. Diplomatic appeasement and negotiating will not persuade Putin to behave in a normal, rational manner. He is antagonistic, he is untrustworthy, and he will do the same again and again. Stop Putin now.
Ladies and gentlemen, we would be remiss in failing to note that as this very rally was being organized last week, an officer was abducted on Friday from Estonia, from within the European Union, on sovereign Estonian territory, and taken to Russia at gunpoint. This is indicative of the menace the international community is facing with a renewed Russian imperialistic aggression. And now, with this established pattern of international state terror, we ask, who is next?
Stop war!
We also have the privilege today of being joined by Ms. Ivonka Surovila, the President of the Government in Exile of Belarus, to provide a greeting.
Dear friends, I would like to congratulate the organizers of this very important and very necessary event. I would also like to ask you not to forget about Belarus. Chers amis, n'oubliez pas la Biélorussie. Déjà en 2002, Poutine a exprimé son désir de faire de la Biélorussie 6 provinces de la Russie. Nous avons toujours été les premières victimes de l'impérialisme russe. Actuellement, nous avons bien peur d'être les prochains à être occupés par la Russie. Je voulais vous dire, de vous rappeler que Loukachenko ne représente pas le peuple de Biélorussie, pas plus que Yanukovych ne représentait le peuple de l'Ukraine. Il y a le peuple qui souffre et qui veut son indépendance et qui est très inquiet en ce moment. Donc n'oubliez pas mon pays, n'oubliez pas la Biélorussie. Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Georiga. Please join me now in welcoming our special guest from Poland, Mr. Tomasz Sakiewicz, Editor-in-Chief of the Polish Gazette and TV Republika in Poland.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Every day, dozens of people are killed in Ukraine. The war has turned into Russia, open aggression against the nation that half a year ago chose independence. Russian aggression in Ukraine is not the Moscow first military action in recent years. In 2008, Russian tanks rolled into Georgia trying to overthrow the government and to subdue the whole country. In the end, only a part of the Georgia's territory was seized. The Kremlin was stopped due to the international action, mainly due to decisive steps of the 5 Central European leaders brought to Tbilisi by the Polish President Lech Kaczynski. At the time, Moscow realized that in the center of Europe was growing a great power which was able to stop imperial ambitions of the Kremlin. This power was constituted by the agreement of 100 million people having diverse cultures, respect for their traditions, but above all, of people who were able to join their efforts against the invaders from the east. No wonder that the main proponent of this agreement, Polish President Lech Kaczynski, was seen as a deadly threat by Moscow. Flying to Smolensk, Russia, on April 10, 2010, President Kaczynski was drawn into a deadly trap. Along with 100 representatives of the Polish state, he wanted to honor the memory of 22,000 of Polish officers murdered in Katyn massacre in 1940. As a result of Russian plotting, the president and the members of a delegation accompanying him were almost completely devoid of security measures necessary during such visits. The research and the investigation carried by independent scientists have shown that the aircraft with the Polish delegation on board exploded just above the ground. The Russians confiscated the black boxes and the wreckage of the aircraft, and so far, even 4 years after the incident, Poles cannot reclaim them. The corpses of our leaders were desecrated, and the victims' families were intimidated. That brings to our minds to tragedy in which nearly 300 people were killed aboard a Malaysian aircraft attack by Russian terrorists operating in Ukraine. Today, we cannot wait any longer. We have to stop Russian imperialism before the war spreads to other countries. Russia must be completely isolated from the world until it ceases the aggression. Ukraine must be provided with the real financial and military help. Let's give them the money and the weapons so that they will be able to protect all of us against another global tragedy. Thank you.
And now I'll introduce the Honourable David Kilgour, long-standing parliamentarian, former Minister of the Crown through multiple portfolios, including international development and foreign affairs, a Nobel Prize nominee for peace, also a celebrated author and recognized activist for human rights and democracy.
Thank you, Yaroslav. Friends, mesdames, messieurs, it's an honor to join you and our guest speaker from Poland, Tomasz Sakowicz. Forgive me on that, I'm sorry. The implosion of the Soviet Union brought freedom to almost 20 restored democracies. Europeans, my friends, were reunited, independent, and free. The EU added 10 countries and almost 80 million citizens to its union of democratic nations. Few North Americans have captured what is going on now in Ukraine, as well as Timothy Snyder. And I quote what he said a few days ago, quote, "To understand Putin, read George Orwell," close quote. And secondly, I quote, "If Putin meets with other leaders, we must simply expect that this is cover for the latest outrage, as with the entrance of Russian troops, armor, and artillery during the recent talks in Minsk," close quote. The EU, US, and Canada have approved stronger sanctions on Putin, thank goodness, to end support for the rebels in eastern Ukraine. More is still necessary, as I think many speakers have said. President Poroshenko must reach out to all Ukrainians to participate in the formation of a new democratic Ukraine. Ukrainians understand what Westerners can and cannot accomplish. I share Snyder's conclusion as well. Quote, "Oppression in Russia, war in Ukraine, and the destabilization of the West are grotesquely high prices to pay for Putin's preferences. If Ukraine becomes Novorossiya and the West collapses, it will not be because of Russia's physical strength, but because of our mental weakness," close quote. Statement by NATO officials that it will defend the 3 Baltic member states, but not non-member Ukraine, are short-sighted. Stephen Blank, senior fellow for Russia on the American Foreign Policy Council, notes, "Throwing Ukraine figuratively under the bus before the NATO summit in Wales is unlikely to encourage other neighbors of Russia, whether or not they are NATO members." I agree with Blank, Stephen Blank too, that Ukraine needs NATO support in the form of weapons, advisors, and training. Thank you. Also, more EU, US, and Canadian financial and political support. And let's go after Yanukovych and get the billions of dollars he stole from Ukraine. As Blank says, quote, "NATO was created precisely to thwart actions such as Russia's current invasion of Ukraine." So the main conclusion, and I hope it's yours too, is that betraying Ukraine and Ukrainians or others in Eastern Central Europe will bring neither peace nor security now or in the future. Thank you.
Who's next? Stop Putin now.
Stop Putin now! 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 now! Stop Putin 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 now!
Thank you.
Stop Putin
now! I would like to thank everyone present for their support and their attendance. In particular, I'd like to thank the Government of Canada for its continued principled stance and support of Ukraine. It is an understatement to say that it is unfortunate and tragic that the Russian Federation has failed to react to international sanctions thus far, and is in fact further escalating its aggression. And I'd be remiss if I failed to note that the signatories of the 2004 Budapest Memorandum, a multilateral international agreement obliging signatories to protect Ukraine's sovereign territorial integrity in exchange for nuclear disarmament. The net result of this failure, the failure to uphold this memorandum, has been to send a message to the people of Ukraine that they cannot rely on international partners, that they themselves will have to unilaterally defend their own territory in the wake of the shattered promise. A shattered promise that has done nothing but further embolden the Kremlin, first to occupy Crimea, later to supply, train, and send an irregular militia, including later sending Russian soldiers and Russian heavy artillery to directly invade southeastern Ukraine with regular soldiers and tanks following weeks of bombardment from the Russian side of the border. We therefore calling upon the Government of Canada to continue its leadership in standing up for Ukraine and to provide more decisive sectoral economic sanctions, particularly against the financial, defense, and energy sectors, military support in the forms of arms, vehicles, surveillance equipment, communications equipment, and other support for the Ukrainian armed forces to defend its sovereign territory against Russia's proxy war and a recent direct invasion, and increase the political isolation of Mr. Putin with no discussion of easing sanctions until we achieve status quo ante, the full withdrawal of all Russian military resources from Ukrainian soil, including Crimea. Stop Putin now.
Putin now! Stop 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 Putin now!